Okay, welcome everyone. My name is Jennifer Tobin and I serve as the Assistant Director of the Natural Hazard Center at the University of Colorado Boulder. I'm so happy to welcome you to the Making Mitigation Work webinar series, which is hosted by the Natural Hazard Center and made possible with support of the Federal Emergency Management Agency and the National Science Foundation. This webinar series, which was launched in 2019, highlights the recent progress in mitigation policy, practice, and research. And today's webinar is actually the first in a special series that will focus on providing place-based hazard mitigation to underserved communities. This special series is made possible by a collaboration with the National Hazard Mitigation Association. A few announcements before we begin the webinar. This forum is being recorded. The captioned video recording and presentation slides from today's webinar will be posted online at the Natural Hazards website, hazards.colorado.edu. This is also where you can find the recordings and supplemental materials from the prior Making Mitigation Work webinars, as well as gain access to many other free resources. So please go check those out after today's meeting. Okay, in a few moments, I'll turn it over to our speakers, but if at any point during the presentation you have a question or comment, please do submit those using the chat function or the Q&A box. I will monitor the questions in both places and return to them during the Q&A section at the end of the webinar. And thanks to a partnership with the International Association of Emergency Managers, attending this webinar makes you eligible to receive 1 contact hour of emergency management training through IAEM. But in order to receive the credit, you are required to attend the entire webinar session today. If you fulfill this requirement, you can then please email Katie Murphy at hazctr@colorado.edu to request your certificate. You can also visit the Making Mitigation Work webpage under the Trainings tab at hazards.colorado.edu for more information. Now, before I introduce our speakers, Ed Hecker from the National Hazard Mitigation Association, who will say a few words about how the NHMA is supporting this series. Ed, over to you.
Thanks, Jennifer, and welcome to everybody from the National Hazard Mitigation Association. My name's Ed Hecker. I'm currently the Director of Operations for NHMA, and which has a significant focus on providing exceptional hazard mitigation practice particularly to communities, and with a specific focus on disadvantaged communities and strategies and solutions that we can develop and deploy to further reduce risk at the community level. We've had a long relationship with the NHC, particularly with our annual hazard mitigation practitioner workshops that follow the annual NHC workshop every July, and now are following that with these series of Making Mitigation Work partnership and webinars, and really look forward to that. And this is the first one, as Jennifer mentioned, so really look forward to the dialogue and particularly the feedback from participants on what we can do to focus on the solutions at the community level. With that, I will turn it back to Jennifer.
Thank you, Ed. I'll share my screen one more time here. Okay. Okay, thank you so much, Ed. We are so grateful for our partnership with NHMA over the years, and we look forward to many more years to come. Now I'm excited to introduce today's webinar, which is titled Networking Resilience, Connecting Underserved Communities to Mitigation Resources. Today, we'll be hearing from Julie Nucci and Gavin Smith, who will be discussing how federal resources that are often made available to build resilience may only be going to those communities that can afford the technical assistance needed to craft competitive proposals. This means that some of the most vulnerable locations aren't able to fund measures necessary to protect themselves from disasters. Julie Nucci will join us to give an on-the-ground perspective and discuss many triumphs and challenges faced in small communities, learning to engage in mitigation planning and hazard reduction strategies. Julie brings both her personal and professional wisdom to the conversation by sharing her experiences with undergoing a years-long project to elevate her historic home in the Village of Owego, New York, after flooding in 2011. And Julie will be joined by Gavin Smith. Through his work at North Carolina State University and in partnership with the Federal Emergency Management Agency, they are developing a program to harness the capacity of universities to provide that direct technical assistance for grant and mitigation planning, as well as offer educational and training curricula. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Julie Nucci and Dr. Gavin Smith to today's webinar. Julie is a scientist and founder of J. Nucci Consulting. She currently works with the National Hazard Mitigation Association and the Federal Emergency Management Agency on engagement and resilience strategies. She holds doctorate degrees in both material science and engineering from Cornell University. Gavin is a professor in the Department of Landscape Architecture at North Carolina State University. His research focuses on hazard mitigation, disaster recovery, and climate change adaptation, and the integration of research and practice through deep community engagement. So now I'm excited to turn it over to Julie to begin the conversation. And as a reminder to the audience, please do drop your questions in the chat or Q&A boxes during Julie and Gavin's presentations, and we'll get to those at the end of the conversation. So Julie, I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen and let you start sharing yours. Take it away.
Okay, can everybody see that? So thank you so much, Jennifer and National Hazard Center, for the opportunity to speak with you today and to share what's really my journey into the field of hazard mitigation by virtue of experience. So I come from a very small little village of Owego, New York, on the Susquehanna River. And for people who don't know where this tiny little village is, it's actually positioned halfway between New York and Niagara Falls. So if you're ever traveling between the two places and you need a great place to have lunch, I highly recommend it. There's a blogger called There She Goes Again. And if you want to read a little bit about my village, you can look at her site, and there's a blog about the very charming village of Owego, New York. So this is what you see if you come into my village. This is our historic county courthouse, and also just note where the river is in this picture. So my village is a historic community. We have really an amazing collection of historic architecture in the village. And it's actually, even though we're such a small community, we are the largest contiguous historic district in New York State. But my community is also disadvantaged. So those seem sort of like disparate things, but they exist in this one community. So the DEC has declared us disadvantaged. The Climate and Economic Justice Screening Tool has declared us disadvantaged. And most recently, FEMA has declared us a community disaster resilience zone. So we are one of 483 communities in the first US designation. So, I mean, so we're the trifecta of disaster, right? So what do you do with this? And I mean, you can kind of curl up in a hole and go, oh, woe is me, which really doesn't get you anywhere. Or you can say, okay, like, I get it. This is our reality. But what this reality means is that state and federal agencies want to help us. And so we need to lean in and to find the light at the end of this tunnel and use these resources. And that's really the challenge for small communities like mine. So to give you a sense of why we have this designation, the yellow border is the village, and you can see the aqua color is the 100-year floodplain, the peachy color is the 500-year floodplain. Just those few little areas that don't have a color, that's the only part of the village that's not in the floodplain. And then the striped region is the floodway. And so the bottom body of water is the Susquehanna River, and on the left of the slide, you're looking at the Owego Creek. So we have kind of the double danger of being positioned at the confluence of the creek and the river. And so in 2011, we found out that that 500-year floodplain map was good. And this is what it looked like. So this is what happens if 12 inches of rain fall in 24 hours. And my house is there. So this is a tough day. And if you look at where the river is now, right, the river is over the bridge. So this is my house. And that's what happened on September 11th. So this is my house now, yay, right? So now my house, it's 4 feet taller. It's actually the first house in the National Register in New York State that was elevated for flood mitigation. The National Park Service has used my house as the poster child for elevation, kind of a dubious honor, to be the, you know, kind of the poster child of disaster, but it's disaster recovery, so I can be good with that. But it's really, it's about so much more than my house. It's about my village. And what I like to tell, if I'm talking to historic preservationists, or if I'm talking to climate people or hazard mitigation people, you got to look so far beyond the house, because who's in that house, right? In that house now, 4 feet higher, is my family that can sleep at night, whose mental and physical well-being are in so much better condition because this house has been elevated. But my house elevated under a FEMA HMGP grant, and 30 houses qualified for that elevation, and only 4 out of the 30 went up, which means that 26 families have, you know, worse flood insurance, less property value, compromised potentially physical and mental health as a result of that situation. And why is that, right? I have an academic background. I know how to write grants. I have a PhD, a 5-year project. I can handle that. But you shouldn't have to have my background to be safe. And there's a fundamental problem in the system if that's the case. And so it then became to me about how can I really help my village? And if you look at our historic inventory, right, we have 72 properties not in the floodplain, and we have about 250 in it. So our historic infrastructure and all the people who live there is at risk. But it goes beyond our historic infrastructure because the whole village is at risk. So First Street's flood factor says 943 out of 1,100 buildings are at extreme risk of flooding in my village. So what's happened in response to that situation? 2 years after the flood, a long-term community recovery strategy document was completed that was funded on New York State Department of State funding. And one of the things in this document that's important to this whole story is that it said, hey, Owego, you need to work your way into the community rating system. And how did that happen? That happened because Kevin Millar, who was the mayor, he became mayor shortly after the flood, was an enormous advocate for the village for resilience. And he's the one who got the long-term recovery strategy document going. He's the one who was pounding on the table saying, we've got to get in the CRS. And so it took, now we're 4 years later, until 2015 to get as far as a CRS quick check. And then the next step is to have the FEMA community assistance visit. So that took till 2019. So that took another 4 years. So finally, fruits of all Kevin's labor. FEMA comes, dishes comes, they have this visit, they assess the village, and by August, we get this letter that says, sorry to inform you, but you have unaddressed actions, non-compliant floodplain development, like we don't see it. Not gonna happen for the village. And that's where an advocate who works like crazy can kind of just throw up their hands and say, like, I'm out. And so things stall. And it's completely understandable why, you know, this happened, because it's so much work that goes in, and then you just hit this roadblock. But then COVID happened. And so community advocate number 2 is actually me. No, not the dark cloud of COVID-19, but actually the silver lining. Because just like everybody else, I got sent home and I had time and I don't sit well. And so I realized, you know, hey, there's something I can do about this. And so, you know, I live in a village that has, you saw the flood map of my village. We've never had a certified floodplain manager. We don't have a planner, we don't have a grant writer, and we have this whole administrative burden of this CAV. So it's like, wow, I want to do this, but it's not going to happen by me doing it alone. But the town had a CFM and a planner, and the county had a planner, and I reached out to them, and through a lot of their effort and their support, things got done. The other very important person to all of this is my mentor and advisor, Jason Fenn, who has really helped me and supported me through all of these endeavors that I have had with the village. And so by February of 21, we got all of the administrative review paperwork submitted. By March of 2021, we had 4 out of 5 regulatory violations cleared. And we're actually 2 years later, still working, 2.5 years later, still working on clearing that 5th one, but we're actually quite close now. So we're hoping to close this CAV soon. But then I hit my wall, right? Kevin hit his wall in 19. I hit my wall in 21. Why did I hit my wall? Because I went back to work. And so now it was like, I don't know what to do. I've exceeded what I thought I could do as just, you know, an active community volunteer, but I broke through that wall by 2022. So how did I do that? So I gave a talk about the elevation of my house at the New York State Floodplain Managers Annual Conference. And I had a second goal for going to that conference, and that was I need a partner because I'm stuck, and I know I'm stuck, and I need somebody to get me over that next hump to help the village. And so I met Jamie Burchard from Barton and LaJudas, who's a climate adaptation planner who has a minor in historic preservation. We had this complete meeting of the minds, and it was exactly what I needed because I know how to write grants. I mean, I was an academic. I wrote big NSF proposals, but I didn't know the funding landscape of climate adaptation. And I didn't have the bandwidth to figure that all out by myself, but Jamie knew. And so she said, hey, you know, you can apply for this New York State Climate Smart Communities grant. And let's try that as an avenue to help get you guys funding, and we can support you to try to get in the CRS. So that's exactly what we did. And that conference was in May. The grant was submitted in July. That's not a lot of time, but we got it done, and we were awarded $125,000 for that grant. But more people were really needed to make that happen. So, you know, the village, the board had to pass a resolution, which we got passed pretty quickly. Jamie was surprised how we got that done so quickly, but it was because Laura Spencer, who's one of the village trustees, was really behind this. And she just helped get this thing through. And this is why. So Laura's bookstore, it's a fantastic old bookstore. It is an iconic image of Owego. But this image of her bookstore is an iconic image of the flood in 2011, when the whole around, its buildings on the corner and around both sides, it was book stacked as high as you could see. And there's more. So for climate smart communities, we have a regional coordinator. This wouldn't have happened without Ashley, because Ashley knew we were really serious about this, and she helped tremendously to get the portal established, help us get that application submitted. And so in that grant, we put together with, you know, Barton and LaJudas, a really realistic plan, which made Jason happy when he saw we're not even saying we're going to try for CRS entry until year 3. We know how much work we still have to do. We have to get our ducks in a row, and then we will work our way in, but it really should be a tractable endeavor to get in there by the end of this 5-year grant. And New York State has climate smart communities, but it also has clean energy communities. And the village has had, I don't have a picture of her, but Jerry Wiley for years has been the staunch clean energy advocate for the village. And because of her, we've been in the Clean Energy Communities program for many years, but that also has a coordinator. And he's really actively working for us now to access grant money. So in the end, the strategy that developed through this work with the private partnership with Barton and LaJudas and all of these community advocates was to say, okay, we need to leverage, we're this under-resourced community, we got to leverage everything that we can leverage. So we have, the CRS program, we've got clean energy communities, climate smart communities, but there's a lot of overlap. And so if you do things in one program that are actually relevant to another program, and you can share those points across the program to help get more grant money. And so the village board loves this because it's bringing them more resources. But just like these programs are supposed to function, the bringing of more resources is tied to the village doing smart things for becoming more resilient. So what else has been happening? In the spring of 2022, when FEMA's HMGP grant proposals came out for us, there was 90% funding because of COVID money. So then you go into the village and you kind of shake them and you're like, village, you have to apply for this money because you only have to kick in 10%. And they did, they applied for a bunch of generators, 2 are gonna get funded. But so if we have backup generators for our water and sewage treatment plants, that's a big deal. Another thing that's getting funded is the elevation of one more historic home, which is my friend Kim's house. So this is my little surprise for her when I found out that funding came through. And her house is an 1802 Greek revival. So her house is 40 years older than mine. And that house will go up this spring. And so this is where the university work first comes in. So I had met Jamie Nucci, who's a landscape architect. And, by the way, in historic properties, the reason why the National Park Service loves my house is because the landscape architecture around it was really good. The way you mitigate the impact of raising that house 4 feet higher. So what we wrote into the Climate Smart Communities grant was to have students design a landscape plan for Kim's house. So there's actually a student competition that's running right now at Cornell. We even found some prize money. And so students will put together landscape plans for Kim's house. They will get to work with the landscape architect who did the design work for my house. And this gives them a real service learning opportunity, opens them up to understanding what kind of opportunity they can have as a practicing landscape architect. And the other thing to keep in mind is if we need it to go for the match, because there's a 50% match on that Climate Smart Communities grant, we can use their time as in-kind contributions. So if you can develop these university service projects, you can also use that to try to offset costs to participate in grant programs. When I was at the New York State Floodplain Managers meeting, I also met Laura Ortiz from the Army Corps, and she told me about Army Corps grants. And so we submitted in the fall of 22 and were awarded in 23 a planning assistance to states grants. And I'm pretty proud to say that we're actually the first community in the country to have the federal match waived based on 2022 legislation. So with a lot more than a village, right? An underserved community really made progress. Right. So between the efforts of 2022 to 2023 have, yielded fruit to the tune of about $1 million in a community whose annual tax revenue is about $2 million. The thing that's happening now in association with the National Hazard Mitigation Association is we're working on our county hazard mitigation plan update, the 5-year update. And so the village, because we aspire to CRS entry, is going to produce our annex in a CRS informed manner that goes beyond what the county is doing. And so NHMA will create a case study based on this. And in addition to having that very community-informed CRS aspect to our annex of the hazard mitigation plan, Ashley, for climate smart communities, gets one climate adaptation plan a year that she gets to do, and she chose Owego. So over the next month, what we'll be doing is synthesizing the county's version of the annex with this additional information that we're bringing into the annex from these other efforts. So I've been at this, actively in my village at a village level for like 3 years. And I have to say that I'm just kind of now feeling like there's a little shift. And boy, you take that little victory where you can get it when it comes to changing the mindset of a community. And it's because we are engaging the community in these discussions. And that's when, for me, it became about much more than my village, because I saw the potential of what could happen. And that actually, for me personally, led to a career change. And so I just kind of took the leap, and a few months ago, filed articles of organization for this consulting company, because there are so many communities that need help. We need all the practitioners that we can get to take on this problem, right? This is a global problem. And, we have this diagnosis of climate change. We don't have a solution. It's not like we have a cure. So, what do you do? And I like to look at it sort of with an analogy of cancer. If you get a cancer diagnosis, you don't go, oh my God, there's no cure for cancer, I can't do anything. You go, oh, what treatment should I have? There are known treatments. Let me treat the cancer. And in a lot of cases, you're going to live a long, happy and healthy life. So we have to do the same thing. We have our treatments for climate change. We can elevate houses. We can dry flood-proof them, wet flood-proof them. We can move them. Last resort, we have to move people and buy out houses. Nobody wants to lose communities, but there are things that we can do to preserve the mental health and the physical health of the people and preserve communities. And that's really the hard work that a lot of community advocates are doing. But that's hard, and it can lead to burnout, and burnout is bad because, as NHMA found with the Resilient Neighbors Network, right? If you're so reliant on this one community advocate and they hit a wall, you can lose momentum. And this is really my segue into Gavin's piece, right? If we can find another way and a mechanism and a support system so that small communities like mine aren't just 100% reliant on community advocacy for change, it would make the whole system so much more sustainable. And so Jason Fenn with NHMA for the last couple of years has been working judiciously on this problem and has made great headway. And there's FEMA Region 2's Hubs for Equitable Resilience and Engagement position paper is kind of in the final stages of preparation. Jason's information is below, so be watching out for that. Jason and I have had a lot of meetings with Cornell of late, and we're talking to a bunch of different people, and there really is a willingness for Cornell as a land and sea grant university to work with state and federal agencies and to work to get funding to the communities that need it. So stay tuned, very much a dynamic situation right now. So my parting message is that for me, what this is all about is that resilience funding has to make all communities safer. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Julie. And if you'll stop sharing your slides, and Gavin can start sharing his.
I know, I'm trying to stop sharing my slide, and my mouse has disappeared.
Oh no, I think I can stop sharing.
Can you stop my share?
There we go. Got it. Okay, go ahead.
Well, yeah, sure. Wow, Julie, we need to talk more often. This is why these events are nice. I just a couple connections. One, we are actually working on a guide to train state and local officials on how to protect historic properties and landscapes from natural hazards. I'd love to talk to you about that.
We do need to talk.
Yeah. Also, if you go to mitigationguide.org, that's a 6-year study that I did with Phil Burke and Ward Lyles, looking at the quality of local hazard mitigation plans, all of our reports and papers, but also a series of best practices are there. So mitigationguide.org. The other thing I'll mention is it's a shout out to the Hazard Center is I met Jason Finn there and Julie. And so we're talking, and what I'm going to talk about next is in many ways thinking along the lines, I think, of Jason and looking at this at a national scale. And so I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. If you bear with me just a second. And talk a bit about a project that we are really excited about. Okay, is that full screen, Jennifer? Yep.
Yep, looks great.
Okay, great. Well, this is a project, and it really does align really nicely with Julie. And Julie, please give a shout out to folks in Cornell to join this effort. And I'll give the pitch at the very end about joining this group, which I think you've seen before. But one thing I did want to mention is, so this is our team, but we are working closely with FEMA on looking to develop a national network of faculty, extension agents, and students to help under-resourced communities. And I'd be remiss if I didn't mention Eric Letvin and Camille Crane, as well as Josh Human, but also Jason Finn. So anyway, I'm going to talk about this larger effort. This is our research team, myself and Shalyn Passalar, as well as a number of graduate students. So this is a disclaimer. This is funded through the Department of Homeland Security in part. And so just want to basically say that the views and the things I'm going to talk about today don't necessarily represent the opinions of DHS. So one of the big issues, and this is something I've been thinking about for decades, actually, going all the way back to my days as a practitioner, as an assistant director in North Carolina Emergency Management, led a team that actually elevated almost 800 homes and bought out over 5,000 following a number of events. And yes, elevation is not easy, by the way, as Julie, I'm sure you've seen. But thinking about how do we better harness the capacity of the university network, if you will, or the university system to help communities, especially those that we found, and this is something that's come up again and again, most recently with BRIC, Building Resilient Infrastructure and Communities grants, is smaller, under-resourced communities are struggling to write these grants. In many cases, they don't even apply. They don't have the bandwidth to do it, and they desperately need help. FEMA is helping them, consultants are helping them, and I'm going to talk about how what we're proposing can complement those efforts. So this is it in a nutshell. How can we develop a university network to assist in the delivery of direct technical assistance? That's what FEMA refers to as their efforts to assist communities write and implement not only building resilient infrastructure and communities grants, but larger HMA grants like HMGP, Hazard Mitigation Grant Program, and to help them develop hazard mitigation plans that can actually, if done correctly, can help inform and even improve the likelihood of successfully applying for and receiving risk reduction grants. So many of you are familiar with the Building Resilient Infrastructure and Communities program. The graphic on the left depicts the process by which FEMA looks to work with communities to assist them over time. And we're looking in our effort, and I'm going to describe in more detail in just a moment, is to think through very specifically how we as a university network can assist in this effort. So this is what we're thinking about. So as I mentioned earlier, FEMA has a number of staff in regional offices, people like Jason, but they also have contractors and even nonprofits that are assisting communities. We're looking to actually insert another team, a large national team of university faculty, including those that are non-tenured, of course. In fact, we're finding in our research, a lot of those may be the most effective. But thinking about how we link those extension agents and others, students to assist, and linking up also with not only land grant universities and non-land grant universities, but also minority serving institutions, centers and institutes like the Natural Hazard Center, the Extension Disaster Education Network, of which Ed and myself and others are really interested in, linking up with professional associations, regional planning organizations, and others. And in many ways, the idea is, how do these university faculty align with the teams that Julie has been putting together? It's a really nice segue, but this is what we're trying to think about, not just in one community, but nationwide. So how are we going to get there? What are we going to do? So what we're looking to do is to first identify, I'm sorry, I'm trying to change my screen share, is to create this national network to support direct technical assistance, to assess the performance of it over time, then ultimately institutionalize a network within a formal framework, and then even develop educational and training curricula for university officials, including faculty, extension, and students. So what are we doing now? This is the first year of what we hope will be a multi-year effort. The first thing that we did is we interviewed university experts. And by that, I mean, we interviewed people at universities around the country that have written award-winning BRIC grants, that have written award-winning hazard mitigation plans, HMA grants, and so forth. And we looked at using that information to inform the development of a national survey, which I'll talk about in more detail in just a moment. But what that survey is intended to do is to assess not only the capacity of different university faculty, extension agents, and others to help, but also their willingness or their commitment to do this over long timescales. And Julie did a great job of explaining what that means. That could mean years. It doesn't happen overnight. It takes a long time. It takes commitment, and it takes dedication. So we're looking to identify those unique people that are able to do both, that have the skills and the commitment to do this. We would look to create this national network. And in fact, we're in the midst of writing a national framework as to how to do it. For example, how might they be supported? One way we're looking at exploring is having university nodes, and perhaps one node in every region. And on further review and analysis, that's probably insufficient. We probably need more than that. And so we're also looking at a whole host of other institutional frameworks that are being provided by places like EPA and others. So this is just an example of how do we, or just a graphic that shows, the idea of the land-grant universities on the left in the green map of the United States, and then those communities that have received BRIC grants in recent years. It's just a conceptual way to show, and this is just land-grant. I want to be clear, we're not just looking at land-grant universities, but one of the reasons we're interested in land-grant is because they have that as their institutional mission, to do deep and enduring community engagement. And so we're looking at building on that idea to include other university partners. It doesn't have to be land-grant universities or just minority serving institutions. So this is where we are in year one. So we've completed the interviews with individuals that have successfully written these grants. That information has been incorporated into a national survey, and we are ultimately looking at developing this on-call grant assistance network, and then finally developing this national framework that will show us and talk or think through how we can institutionalize this concept over time. So the first phase is community engagement, or talking with them. And it really was helpful because as all of you know in the academic world, but also those in practice, being able to talk and sit down with those that have done things that involve process, that involve not just a yes or no answer, to try to unpack some of the details like Julie was talking about. What is it that you did that was successful and led you or enabled you to write an award-winning grant? How did you do it? How did you engage with the citizens? How did you gain their trust, and so forth? And so that information, again, has been transcribed, and we're actually analyzing that data. We're writing a journal article as well as a report on these findings, but more importantly, we're incorporating those results into the national survey. And in fact, this national survey, we are final throes of, if you will, of going through our institutional review board. We hope to release the survey in the coming weeks. But what, again, as I alluded to earlier, the real purpose of the survey, and the survey will be sent out to university faculty around the country, and looking at, again, not only the technical capacity to write a grant, to do benefit cost analysis, to do community engagement, to do project closeouts, and all the details that involve an HMA grant, and also a BRIC grant. How do you deal with creating nature-based solutions? How do you perform the cost effectiveness of those grants, and so forth? And so using that information and incorporating it into a survey, we're looking to identify a large body of people that can do this type of work. And then we're also looking at, on this on-call network, is trying to find out those that would be willing to serve. those that might be tied to a node. It doesn't have to be, but also trying to find out who has both the capacity and the commitment to engage in this larger network. This is kind of where we are. In fact, this slide is a bit dated. To date, we've identified over 800 individuals that we'll be sending this survey out to that have been identified across the country that have, we believe, expertise in HMA grants, hazard mitigation plans, and so forth. As you can see, this is an old map, but we do have gaps. We've got gaps in the Midwest. We also need to do a better job of identifying more minority serving institutions. And so these are just, this is like I said, an older image, but we're excited that we've added more than 100 people. I believe it's about 150 at this point. And that information, those individuals will be receiving the survey shortly. Based on the results of the interviews and the survey, we're going to be developing a draft framework that will, as I said earlier, look at existing network structures, even look at theoretical models of networks that deal with big societal questions. We're also assessing those institutions that have done this well and those that have done it not so well. We're even thinking about this idea, the big picture is perhaps even thinking through how we might develop something akin to resilience extension agents in communities. That's a big picture idea. We'll see how that goes in time. And then ultimately, these draft models will be further refined by the results of our survey and interviews. So kind of coming back to where we were, we have finished the survey. We're this is my last pitch, if you will. We are near to finishing the survey recruitment, if you will. So again, one of the things that we're doing when we reach out to people around the country is asking, are you a faculty member or an employee at a land-grant university, public or private university, including minority serving institutions? We're also asking those of you on this call and elsewhere, have you assisted with hazard mitigation plans and climate resilience plans or helping with risk assessments? Have you written a successful grant, a BRIC grant or HMA grant? Would you be committed to ongoing community engagement and the delivery of direct technical assistance? And then also asking questions about the individual's interest in building the capacity of you and your colleagues, including students, to provide this direct technical assistance. Because one of the things that we're also working on this year is actually developing and building off of the training materials that FEMA has to deliver BRIC grants, HMA grants in a broader sense, as well as hazard mitigation plans, but looking to inject into that training very specific things that university faculty and extension agents need to know that will make them successful in assisting communities with this effort. So what we're looking to do is we're actually actively reaching out for those of you that are interested, those of you that are part of a university, either directly affiliated as a faculty member, could be a research faculty, a research professor, could be an extension agent, could be part of a university-funded center or institute. We're very interested in looking to reach out to you. And if you're interested, please go and take a look at the survey URL that's provided here. My last bit is to basically ask you to, if you're interested in participating, another way to do that is to connect to the link ncsu-dta-support at ncsu.edu. That will ask for your name, email, and website. And that's all I've got. And I think I'll turn it back over to Ed.
Actually, it'll go back to Jennifer, who will lead the Q&A.
Yes, thank you so much, Gavin and Julie. That was an amazing presentation from both of you, and there's just so much work to be done. So I'm going to go ahead. There's lots of questions coming into the Q&A and the chat, so I'm going to go ahead and just start reading those off for you to answer, so we can hear more from your, learn more from all of your wisdom and experience here, as these questions are really great. The first one is, what aspects of the approach taken for Owego can be standardized into some sort of template or guidebook for other small and underserved communities, many of whom lack the necessary knowledge and skills it takes? So this one's for Julie.
So I think a really important thing is the message that you need to go beyond the walls of your community to get help, right? Things started to happen when I went outside the village to the town, to the county, to FEMA, So I think that has to be kind of rule one. Another thing that I hope could come from now looking at these larger networks is if there could be, and I don't know if this exists anywhere, but some kind of a mentorship program, right? Where so now I've had experience in my village. If there's somebody else who's where I was 3 years ago, is there a place they could look for someone to help them? I would happily help someone. And I think that community to community, we will understand each other and be on common ground. So if something like that could be created, I think it would be very helpful.
Thank you, Julie. Okay, now we have a question for Gavin. Do you find that your university appreciates your efforts to make real world impacts rather than your work being limited to the ivory tower? The work that my organization does, which is similar to yours, seems to fall on deaf ears with higher ups at my university. It's frustrating.
That's it's almost as if I don't know who this is, but it's actually it's a great question, and it is literally something we're asking in the survey. We're trying to unpack those individuals that are supported by their university, or if you're not, what we're trying to do, this may sound a little strange, but we're actually in our training for university officials, we are ultimately going to be looking to figure out ways to train university faculty to go towards their department heads or higher ups and make the case as to why this is important. And that's the kind of training that, it would build on FEMA's already a pretty extensive training on HMA grants, but rather, how do we train faculty to succeed in this environment? And you're exactly right. I will just say that our number of faculty members have told me directly, and I've seen it in former universities that I've worked in, where they were not rewarded. They were penalized. And so it's a really important issue. And that's why I talk about capacity and commitment. But there's also this institutional dimension that we're looking to address. Great question.
Wonderful. That was from Rachel Riley. Okay, next question is for Gavin from Tracy Kirkland. Does your current work or future planning overlap with or collaborate with FEMA's Resilient Nation Partnership Network? Seems like such a great opportunity to close some of those gaps to identify community experts in mitigation and resilience work.
Well, we are all ears. In fact, I didn't, Jennifer, I didn't hear everything that you said, but it was the university network. Well, I'm sorry, the
FEMA's Resilient Nation Partnership Network.
No, well, I have heard of it. And in fact, if there is more information, I would love to hear it because we're desperately looking to, I shouldn't say desperately, we are looking to expand our network. And that's another issue within our work is we don't want to duplicate something. And a big part of this is how do we develop a network of existing networks? If there are already those networks out there, especially if those networks are already trusted, we don't want to be that person that comes in and tries to modify those trusted networks. So if you've got this idea or this network, please feel free to share it with me. That'd be great.
Okay, I have a question from Lori Peak. I wonder if Gavin might have a long-term vision for tracking impact of this network. Here I'm thinking about long-term evaluation of where people end up who participate in this program. Do students who volunteer, for example, go on to public service or graduate school, et cetera?
Yeah, so Lori, good question. Within the framework, we will be, and we're expected to, FEMA wants us to be able to track the work we've done, but also track things that work well or don't, and to modify the network over time and to incorporate that information into updated training. But yes, it's a real interest of mine is how do we get the next generation and the generation after that to kind of carry this forward. So yes, absolutely. We will be looking to develop metrics that we would use as part of this larger framework that I talked about very briefly.
Awesome. Thank you, Gavin. Now a question from Ed to both of you. What challenges or constraints have you experienced in improving the effectiveness of mitigation at the community or state level, especially for disadvantaged communities?
You want me to go first? I mean, a huge challenge is just the lack of resources and personnel, right? Even, sometimes it may be difficult even for a community to understand what they should be looking for and to even assess the situation is one thing. And if they do know, then the next hurdle is what's the funding landscape? And then the next hurdle, if you find the grant, is, well, how do I write a grant? And the way that I've come to think about this, it's sort of like I used to run the hurdles in middle school. And it's like you get over one, there's another one. You get over one, there's another one. But you just have to take them on one at a time. But in the end, the big barrier is communities need help to know the grant opportunities, get the grants written, make sure they get some kind of management support for that grant written in the grant. So if they are so fortunate to get a grant, then they're equipped to actually implement it.
Yeah, and adding to echoing what Julie said, myself and Olivia Vila, former PhD student of mine that I know has worked with Lori as well. We did a study on the issues of equity in HMA grants management, and we found that a large number of smaller communities or poorer communities didn't even try to write the grants, including efforts that FEMA made to give them, advanced assistance or others, even to write a very modest application for more money. They didn't even do that. And so what that told us is that they have such limited capacity, such limited time, that these communities desperately need help. There are a lot of communities out there, and we all know this. Those that are among the most socially vulnerable have been placed in these areas for all sorts of reasons. Whether it's racism or whether it's cost of land or whatever the issues may be. And so they desperately need this help. And so we're hopeful that our efforts can play a small role in helping with that.
And I actually just have one other comment, because so like now with all of these disaster designations, disadvantage designations that Owego has, if I could write one grant for the village, the one that I think I would want to write like today is, can I fund a person? Can I get a certified floodplain manager in the village? But I don't know if anybody here knows a funding source that I could go to fund a person. That would make all the difference, because we don't have one, and it's the code enforcement officer, and he's super overburdened with trying to be the code enforcement officer, let alone trying to be a floodplain manager for a position he has not been trained.
I couldn't agree more with what Julie just said. Going all the way back to practice in the 90s and early 2000s, we created a lot of state programs to address gaps in federal programs, and then we dropped these state programs on top of the federal programs, further overwhelming the locals. But it was our fault that we didn't actually use some of that money, and it was substantial in state level, to basically allow communities to hire a person. That's what they desperately need. And this brings us back to, we need 1,000 more Julies that actually don't have to go back to work, but rather they can stay focused on these issues. And I'm hopeful that this university network can allow for that. And in fact, in the survey, we asked questions trying to get at, are some of the folks willing and capable and available to assist over longer timescales?
Great, thank you. And then actually there's a follow-up question about university funding from Rachel Riley, so I'll go ahead and ask that now as it ties into this conversation. Rachel asks, Gavin, do you anticipate the university-based technical assistance being unfunded or funded in some way? It seems like a big lift for university faculty to provide direct technical assistance without being compensated in some way. Utilizing class projects can be one avenue, but probably isn't enough to meet the demand. And she says she really appreciates work.
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, I wouldn't be working on this effort if I didn't believe that within this framework, they would be a funding mechanism to pay university faculty, extension agents, and students to offer this assistance. And that is going to be a key part of our proposed framework. This is the funding that is necessary to allow them to do this. I have three colleagues in North Carolina State that have written 3 BRIC grants, and they've all 3 been approved, but they did it for free. That's not sustainable. And they're doing it because they deeply care about these communities, and it's incredible. But we need those people to be able to be paid, just like you would a consultant and just like you would a governmental employee. So yes, that is part of the framework.
And another funding question back to Julie from Eric. He asks, was there a data plan needed to meet Region 2's 5 violations in Owego? And if so, where did the resources and training come from?
Was there a data plan?
A data plan needed to meet Region 2's 5 violations in Owego. And was there resources or training for that?
I'm gonna give that one to Jason. Oh, Jason, can talk, can he? No,
He
no,
can actually.
I
Let's see.
did not deal with a data plan. So you are speaking of things about which I don't know.
Okay, Jason, I have given you talking access if you would like to answer that question.
I guess we always need to come in expecting the unexpected. Thanks for the opportunity, Jennifer. Data plan, I don't know that there was ever really any question about whether the identified violations were the ones that remained were violations. And so we certainly had data that was brought to bear with each of them, and much of that came from the municipality in demonstrating compliance in some of the larger violations that were identified. I'd be interested in maybe hearing more about the way others might see the role of the data plan.
Thank you, Jason. Okay, so I have another question. Did the Rockefeller Foundation's 100 Resilient Cities initiative leave behind a legacy resource communities could draw on? So did the Rockefeller Foundation's 100 Resilient Cities leave behind legacy resources that communities could draw on? If either of you know much about that.
I do not.
You know, I hesitate to say too much about that. I do know that there have been some challenges in some communities, some great ideas, great renderings, and really good, interesting ideas. But the carry through, the follow through, the implementation, I think was highly varied across those different those communities that were awarded those funds.
Great, thank you. And so I know we only have about 1 minute left before I turn it back to my announcements, but I would like to end with this great question from Ed Hecker. If we could implement one change to improve disaster risk reduction through mitigation at the community level, what would that be from your perspective?
I guess for me, I would say, well, can I have two, Ed? It's almost hard to say which one's more important, but we need people, we need personnel, and we need grant writing assistance. I think those are really the big two.
Yeah, maybe adding to what Julie said, I kind of maybe a higher level is that communities desperately need increased capacity to do this work. The wealthier communities that have the staff, many of them are doing great work around the country, and those are the ones we often hear about. There are thousands, if not tens of thousands, of communities that want to do more, but they don't have either the money, the political will, the technical expertise, the data, needed to do all this, and it needs to all be combined. It's not just technical work; it's also political will. It's also people, and so forth. So that building of capacity is absolutely critical. And Jennifer, before we close, I think there were some questions about where to apply for the survey, and it is in the last slide of my presentation. So I don't know if this is being shared with folks on this webinar, but that would be one way for them to get it.
Yes, we will share the slides from both of you on our website after this meeting, as well as the full recorded presentation. And also for Julie and Gavin, if you want to take a look through the comments, there's a lot of comments too. I just focus on the questions for you, but there are comments throughout that as well. Thank you both so much for this incredibly important conversation. The work you do is just invaluable, and I can't wait to see how this expands and grows and helps communities across our country. Let me go ahead and start sharing my screen again here. Okay. Oops, wrong screen. Share screen. Okay, here we go. Desktop too. Okay, so in addition to offering such gratitude for Julie and Gavin and the many contributors to this outstanding effort, we do want to thank FEMA, the National Science Foundation, and the National Hazards Mitigation Association once again for making this webinar series possible. We are so grateful for all of you for joining us today. And before we close, we just have a few brief announcements. First, please remember to contact us at hazctr@colorado.edu if you plan to request the continuing education credit generously offered by IAEM. And we hope you'll join us for our next Making Mitigation Work webinar on Tuesday, December 12th, 2023 from 11 a.m. to 12 p.m. Mountain Time to learn about climate change impacts on children's health and well-being. We also hope you'll subscribe to updates to the Natural Hazard Center website, so you will receive notifications about upcoming webinars and other free resources and information, including signing up for the Natural Hazards Workshop announcements, as well as the NHMA practitioners meeting that follows the workshop. And now, on behalf of our entire team at the Natural Hazards Center, we want to thank you again, Gavin and Julie, for this wonderful presentation and all of the participants who joined us today. We look forward to seeing you all again in December. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Jen and Julie, are we signing off at this point?
Yeah, we can, unless I didn't know if you needed to like have a
Well,
moment to scroll back through any of the comments. or
you know
anything.
what? Yeah, you read my mind. I was actually desperately scribbling down, and I can't even read my own writing. I don't even know how to do this, but is there a way just to share that, like to send those comments to me?
I'll send them to you afterwards.
Okay, I'm pretty primitive, you know. So if you can do that, I'm sure you do. That would be helpful.
Yep, I'll go ahead and clean those up and get those sent over to you, so they're a little bit nicer to look through, and then any information and if you need contact information and stuff afterwards, just let me know and I'll be able to provide that for you. So
That'd be great.
Gavin, those couple places that you said I should look, could you kindly shoot those to me in an email?
yes, of course, I'll put them out for both of you.
Yeah. Well, thank you both so much for
Yeah, that's great. Always pleasure to join your shout out.
Yes,
Thank
thank
you.
you so much. That was
Okay, all right.
awesome. And we look forward to
Okay,
seeing you
happy to
again
see you.
soon.
Yep. Okay.
Bye.
Bye.
Take care.